Chris, thank you so much for coming to join us. We want to learn more from your experiences as a grant writer and a mentor of early career researchers. And Joe and I have a lot of questions for you. So thank you. Okay. What we thought we'd start with is what is simple and yet complex, which is just writing. How do you write? And so we wanted to know, what strategies have you used or have you changed that help you get grants written?
Yeah, so I think that's multiple parts to that. On the one end, getting grants, so taking an idea and writing your grant. I think what's really important is, in the process of doing that, is obviously getting a research question, really honing in on what is your actual research question. I feel like a lot of people, especially the young learners, don't really do that all that well. It's taking their idea, but you can have an idea, but your idea is not a research question. You have to actually write a coherent research question. And it's always really important to take the time to make sure that's right up front. And don't try to go on and write the rest of your grant without making sure that your research question, that you've really thought it through, that it's clear, it's concise, it's sound, it's something that you can actually study and answer with a scientific method. Making sure you do all that up front, I think, is really important, because if you don't, it ends up, from my experience, is you have a research question that you can't really answer really in a scientific way. You end up writing a whole grant based around that. And then you get some feedback later on in the process, and you have to go back around and try to change that up. And it's just it ends up being a waste of your time.
So when you're trying to find a good research question to write, and you have an idea, you have a couple ideas, who are you going to initially ask that question, find out if that is good?
Yeah. Another really important thing, I have a couple of mentors, to your point, that have helped me with that. So I will come up with an idea. And actually, before I even start really writing down the actual, what I think is the research question, what I will do is I will go to my mentors and I will actually ask them, okay, here's my idea. Here's my research question, and here's how I plan to answer that question, and get feedback again up front from trusted mentors who have been successful in this, so that I can start that process of writing that grant in a good spot. So I will do exactly that. I have probably 3 people in my orbit that I ask those questions to, and I regularly do that.
And can I follow up? You just talk it through with them at this early phase. You don't try writing it out or whatever. You're just like, I got a thing. It could go this way, could go this way. What do you think?
Yes, exactly. And so what I'll do is I'll talk it through. I'll jot some notes based on this conversation. Then what I do is I'll go back, and then I will start to write the question out, or write out the research question, how I propose to answer this question, what the methodology will be. Then I usually will go back to my mentors or whoever that person is and say, okay, now that we've gotten to this part, what do you think about this research question? And then my proposed methodology.
Mm-hmm.
So in your history, I know that you've mentored a little bit, you have too. What do you look for? What does it mean to have a good research question? What does that look like?
Yeah, that's great. That's also a very important question. In my world, it's a research question that is one that you can actually answer in using sort of scientific method. It's a question that's actually answerable. So I'll give you an example. Yeah. I had a fellow, a toxicology fellow once, who applied for this grant and was going to write a research question. And the research question was, and I'm sort of paraphrasing this, but you get the point, was, does a certain antidote improve outcomes in a certain population of patients? But the problem is that, as you can see with that particular question, is, when you're saying improve outcomes, you have to define what that means. Right. And so that's a very vague sort of question that is really going to be almost impossible to answer for a lot of different reasons. And so that is one that I think is, it's a very blatant example. But that's one where I think you would look at that and say, there's much more detail, and you have to be more granular about what you're actually answering in that particular case. And so I would say that that's like an example of a poor research question. It has to be one that is something that you can actually answer with a certain methodology, has very clear, variables and outcomes, so that when you're studying it, these things are clear, and that you can, obviously something also that, when you write the research question out and you put together your methodology and design, that someone then can come back and do, reproduce what you've done.
Yes. Can I build on what you're saying? Because it makes me think, I remember you had a class, Joe, in biology, and I don't remember what class that was, but you were reading a manuscript. Mm-hmm. It was a pretty hardcore manuscript. It was like transcriptomics or something. Woo! And I knew like just enough to be dangerous. And he was supposed to present it to the class, and I was like, I'll help you. I'll read this paper. And I was like, oh my gosh, And literally, like I had to take it sentence by sentence because it was quite jargony. I mean, it was very, very technical. Nevertheless, we could follow along. And I got to the bottom and I said, this is not reproducible. This manuscript did not tell us enough to know if you wanted to do this same study, could you do it? And that is a big no-no for science, right? I mean, that's the whole basis.
That's a good point. And we found out they didn't specify the gender.
The sex.
Mm-hmm.
Of the cells.
Of the cells.
Yeah.
I'm like,
that's
a
granular detail.
That's one of those details where certainly the highest level funders, right, the National Institutes of Health, expect rigor and reproducibility. And that is the hallmark of the only science they would fund, because we are in the business of reproducibility in the scientific method.
Yeah, exactly.
So the other thing you said, Chris, is sometimes people are just too vague. Mm-hmm. So it doesn't mean, like, oh, I want to improve outcomes. That's not like the end of the story. Like, just kill that idea dead. Mm-hmm. No, you say, well, what do you mean by outcomes? Right. What you want to use this antidote in what form, in what dose, at what time frame, for who, right? Like, what if they're on other things? Like, there's so many details that need to be further specified. You might be able to get there, but you might be 12 steps away from that. So you have to keep driving down. And sometimes, in contrast, people are so granular that you're like, well, look, we want to be specific, and yet we are trying to advance all of science. Sure. So, like, what's the general case of this? Mm-hmm. Could we find a bigger story here than, earthworms and whatever, right? So, like, I do think it's this dance, and a really good mentor can help you in those conversations. Like, what about this? What about this? And then it's for you. What do you want to be the primary outcome? Do you want it to be mortality? Do you want it to be morbidity? Do you want it to be, functional outcomes? Like, whatever. It's not my grant. What do you want it to be about? But it's got to be about something.
Correct. Yes. And I've seen that multiple times, and people have great ideas, but they just, to your point, that's what the mentorship, the process of mentoring someone is, to get at exactly that.
Well, it's funny. We were interviewing another scientist who I helped when he was just starting out. Super creative, super bright, and actually early days was pretty resentful of putting his beautiful out-of-the-box ideas into the box of the history of science. Mm-hmm. And I wondered for a time if he would get so frustrated with the way we do grants that he would give up, honestly. But he didn't. He came around, and he's using his creativity to do very innovative science. I'm really, really happy for him. But I do remember him sort of chafing at the idea that, no, you care about the thing. But like, we have to be highly specific, because this is science here we're doing, right?
Yes.
So
exactly.
How do you help people? Just keep asking them questions. What's the process, as Joe's saying, to get from the idea to the research question that's testable?
Yeah. So to me, it is like you just said, this is why I do it for myself, because again, sometimes you get so caught up in an idea that you don't see, like, you're missing this particular part, and an audience outside of your own brain is not going to understand, what you're getting at in a particular area. So what you're talking about in the mentoring process is this back and forth that I really like about, you give me what you think is your research question, and let me sort of give you, or me doing, somebody else doing that for me, get down to like what you were talking about, and which was, getting down to, okay, this particular thing is, outcomes of itself is not testable. You need a more granular, specific detail. And to your point, also that back and forth is great because it can then keep you away from getting too granular, like you said, like how earthworms do in space or whatever it is, to get something that is somewhat maybe generalizable to other populations outside of your local area. And so that back and forth, I think, is really important, which is why you have to meet with your mentor. If you're the mentee, you have to meet with your mentor, do the work that your mentor is asking you so you can move this thing down the field.
I remember watching one of your previous interviews, and I heard, don't let perfection get in the way of progress. Mm-hmm. Would you agree with that when it comes to just a writing strategy?
Yeah, I think so. I think another thing that I've seen people do that I've tried to avoid myself is writing and not giving. So if you have a relationship with your mentor, is your mentor asks you, hey, get me a draft of this so I can go through it. But then you're trying so hard to make everything so perfect that you end up not getting that piece of work back to your mentor. And that is also not a great strategy. That's why you have a mentor, because your mentor can help you. So you have to put the work in, don't get me wrong, but trying to make it so perfect so that it impedes you actually giving that to your mentor. Because remember, your mentor is going to give you some great information back. So you need to put the work in, but it doesn't have to be perfect right when you give it to them, because they're going to give you some feedback. And so I definitely live by that. Yeah. Don't be sloppy, but also get the work, get it to a good spot and let your mentor look at it for you.
Yeah. Don't give your mentor something that you haven't really
put your effort into it. Yes.
Don't let them just be your editor.
Yeah. Yes. Well, that's the other thing for a mentor. I feel like, and this is something I learned actually from Anne, is you cannot. And I'm trying very hard to put this into my practice. There are a lot of times where you want to be their editor and just, you know what? They gave me this. I can fix this up and clean this up and give it back to them. But then they didn't learn anything in that process. And at the end, if you're the mentor, it's not about you, it's about them. And so I learned from Anne, you have to teach them how to do it correctly, but let them do it. And so that's a really important lesson that I have taken to heart when I first heard you say that, and I'm working on doing that. That's a very important part of the back and forth. The grant submission's a great example of doing that, because people have to go through that process. There's a lot of learning that goes through the grant submission process on multiple levels. And so anyway, yes.
Speaking of grant submission.
Yes.
Yes. Are you working on one right now? Have you just submitted one?
Yeah, I have a fellow that's working. I'm working with a fellow she's a pediatric, she's trained in pediatrics. She's a toxicology fellow, and she wants to. She had an unfortunate event in her life where she had a family member who died from opioid use disorder, and so one of her things is there's a gap in the world of adolescent opioid use disorder, and she wants to actually start a service. And in one of our local hospitals, and so we're actually working on a NIDA-funded grant for her to study. It's really more of an implementation grant, her implementation and education program. And the outcome is then to see, she's created a clinical care pathway based on opioid use disorder. So basically, like, if this, then do that for patients, like give them this drug or don't give it to them, or give them these other drugs based on sort of some clinical parameters. She's created that. And so we're going to look at adherence to her pathway in pre and post this intervention, which is this education program. And so we're in the process of trying to submit that now.
Nice. What mechanism is that? Do you recall?
It's NIDA. It's NIDA. So
it's NIDA. Is it an R, a K?
Oh, sorry. No,
T?
So it's not a T. It's a pilot. It's this new pilot that they actually have, but it's actually a pilot that's specifically aimed at opioid use disorder. They have this new sort of silo of grants aimed at opioid use disorder. So it's really a mentored pilot grant.
Oh, nice. Yeah. Can we talk about pilots?
Yes.
Right. Or I'm sorry, were you going to ask something else?
No. So what I've learned from today.
Yes.
So you're submitting a pilot grant. Mm-hmm.
Chris is the mentor.
I'm the mentor. That's
okay.
Correct. Mm-hmm.
So are you assuming this is going to lead to more grants?
Yeah. So what the part of the thing is, grants beget grants. So what I want, the aim for her learning is always number one, but number two is so that she can get this data and now build on top of this. Right. And so she'll have this pilot data. There's some other questions we can ask based on what she's doing here. But it'd be great to get this pilot data, and then the next grant she submits, say, here's what we've done so far, and now we're going to ask this further question based on what we've done. And so we're hoping that this will be the start of her being successful in her grant, in her submissions, and her scholarly life.
Which is why pilot grants are like the first step, it's often the first thing, that it's often awarded to very junior people.
Correct.
Now, Chris is talking about a pilot program at the National Institutes of Health.
Correct.
So that's pretty fancy. Like, great, go for it.
Yeah.
Nevertheless, if you can get pilot money to do something that costs money, then you take that and you roll that to the next grant, to the bigger mechanism, then you roll that to the next bigger. So that's how grants are always building on each other.
That's right.
And that's why often when you think about, what do? I did this project or this project in my fellowship. Prior, I worked on this lab and we published a few papers. Well, which angle is the best angle to pursue if you're just starting out and you want your first grant? Well, anything that shows you have some kind of track record.
Yeah.
You'll benefit the most from a track record. And part of that track record is pilot data,
Yes.
right? Showing that you can obtain information that you're interested in, and maybe it actually shows something that you want, but that's highly valuable.
Yes.
And now, you mentioned this grant your mentee is doing is a mentored pilot grant.
It is.
So many of the pilot grants are, because generally it's like super junior people.
Which you've probably been a part of a lot.
Yes. And so, part of the game is, young person, you want to do this thing. Who the heck do you ask to be your mentor on a mentored grant? Do you have any thoughts about, part of being a fellowship director, it's like, oh gosh, here they come. It's me.
Yes.
But if assume that's not
Yeah.
the case,
Yeah.
and you're in an institution, a smaller institution or place without a fellowship program, you don't have a director to go to. Where
What do you
these
do?
people are, what do you do?
So one of the things I've also learned, as an example, there's one fellow who had this idea. It was a great idea, but myself nor my faculty, there was no one with that expertise. So we actually had to go outside a department, but in the same, we could come here to the School of Medicine. There were two people that had expertise in what my fellow wanted to study that we unfortunately didn't have the full suite of expertise for. So I reached out to these people and asked them if they wanted to help my fellow in his particular area, and people were great and they decided to help. And so he applied for a grant. It was a basic science grant. He was going to study a particular line of mice, looking at poisoning them with a particular poison and seeing how they did. And so we got someone from here who had done animal studies, had an animal lab, who agreed to mentor my fellow. So sometimes you get creative and you go find the person who has the expertise. So, there are fellowship directors who have written to me who said, I feel like I needed to be the one who mentored the fellow. But to me, it's not about that. It's finding the person who's got the actual expertise so your fellow can learn. If you bring it back to the learning piece, I feel like that's always the thing that making decisions that makes things work out.
Very cool.
Yeah, I will say in the early career research training program I've run for 20 years now, what we say is, you come into our program, we are your ready-made mentorship team, and you have us forever.
Yeah.
You never graduate,
Full
right?
life. Yeah.
And yet we can't be your forever team. So our whole goal is to help you find your forever career mentor, content mentor, statistical mentor, methods mentor, whatever you need. And so a huge part of, for the mentees that are assigned to me, I give them weekly homework. It doesn't have to be called homework. I call it homework, even though they're grown-up adult people, is every week they have to make at least one meeting with some kind of scientist who I will give them a whole list of people. You got to go to this person. You got to go to this. You need to meet, you have to understand your environment and go meet everybody you can locally. Yeah. And with every meeting, you say, now that you know a little bit about me, who else should I talk to? And so you snowball. And so your goal is within 6 months, you've got a pretty good personal encounter with a number of people that then you can draw on as you're making your own
That's true.
plan.
Yeah.
So how long into you being a mentor did you start doing that, and do you see it's actually really helped people be able to spread their wings after you're done with them?
I started very early because, as Chris reminds me, some of my early mistakes. Right, my early mistakes as a mentor was I was the mentor who loved too much, and I was like, we're going after that grant, like you're gonna be successful with or without you know, like whether you like it or not. And I would say, and that's how, again, it was in hindsight, I was doing the best I could, but that was a mistake. I'd say, my very first job as a research director, I had 12 senior PIs, and my job was to help them get more collaborative grants among each other. We needed more collaboration within the center. And I'd say, let's all write a grant. I was like, I'm the human connector. I was the human energy. And it was fine. But, really, as Chris says, like, I already did this one time. Like, this is not my career, it's your career. I will help you learn this. And if you ultimately choose not to do it, that's all and you have to, that's a little bit of a gut check for a mentor. But, you want to build sustainability. You don't want to, it's sort of like passing all the students who didn't really learn algebra, and then you're like, somehow they'll catch up in calculus. No, they won't. No, they won't. You have to help them learn that first step, and that's just how it goes.
Yep.
So
Agreed.
Anyway.
Totally agree.
Yeah, but I absolutely, it's also something nice you can do when you're not sure what to do. It's always productive for your own research and for your own professional career to go learn about other people's work.
Yeah.
Look them up look up their publications, look up their funding, read a couple of their things and ask them about that. Not just like, tell me what you do. No, like take a real interest. You will learn something.
Absolutely.
And, that's just good business. And it makes life interesting.
Mm-hmm. Yes.
So for these new researchers looking for a mentor, trying to find a team, whatever, what are some common characteristics when it comes to someone coming to you, hey, can I work with you on this? I would really like help. What do you look for? What do you think is a common theme when you're saying yes to these people to help them out?
Yeah, so that's a thing I learned recently.
Okay.
I learned this recently. The most important thing to me, it's really two things. One, I want someone who's sort of like, most fellows don't have like a concrete, like, I'm going to study this protein, for my career and do X, Y, Z. But I want them to have some, I want to study this drug, because it's, our outcomes are poor, like our mortality is still too high, and, there's an antidote that will, help, and I want to study that. And that's still too general, but I want to hear them articulate to me, like, okay, what is it that you really want to do? Number one. Number two, I want them to have a career plan. And here's what I mean by that. Not that they have to have it completely written out, but like 5 years from now, I want to be an independent investigator, and I need to do this and this and this to get there. Like, I want to hear that part of it, because I want to be part of that team that does that, but I don't want it to be, I want them to, because one of the things I want them to do is to sort of commit. So we all want a return on investment. And for me, the return is to see someone else go be successful. Right. And I want to feel like they are committed to doing the work that's going to be needed to go be successful. So some of these things, I want to just hear that they thought some of these things through before taking them on. And then the last thing is, obviously is the work ethic thing. It's hard to know that up front. I just want to know that they're going to be willing to like follow through. So if they have a grant that they need to get done, I want to know that they're going to follow through on it. And, again, I was one of those people, wayward, didn't know what in the heck was going on when I started. But, there's a couple of little things I'd like to see before I take someone on, because I want them to have a chance to go off and be successful. And, we all want to work with people like that. And so, I don't know, that's sort of my look. How about you?
I like those qualities.
Yeah, okay.
A question.
Yeah.
How do you do anything to test the hypothesis that they will follow through?
One of the things I do now is I ask them to write a 1-pager.
I do too.
You do that too?
I do.
Yeah.
I do. I even give them up to 2 pages.
You do, yeah.
Because guess what?
Yeah. A lot of
90% of them never come back.
Exactly.
Never come back?
Yeah.
90.
Oh, it's a high,
95.
It's a high number. And
I'd say
the ones that turn it over rapidly, I'm like,
Yeah.
this one,
Bingo.
you really want to do this. You care about this, obviously. I can work with you.
Okay.
Well,
That's
I
what
think
do.
it's also it shows so many things,
It
right?
does.
First of all, somebody heard a request and did it, right? Like you followed the directions
Yes.
and you implemented the request. Like even if it's a bunch of nonsense,
Right.
like you asked for me for a page, I'm going to give you a page, and you're professional enough to follow up. You don't just ghost me
Yeah.
because it's like too much work or you're too busy, whatever. The second thing is it means you can actually write sentences. I think there's a lot of people who can talk a game, and I'm like, and yet somehow you have to be able to say what you're thinking in writing, or this research game won't work.
Right.
Like you have to be okay with writing sentences. And then I also think I just did this with somebody, literally. And I will tell you, his first response to me, I mean, I'm generously giving an hour of my time, or 45 minutes of my time, talking to him, exploring what he needs. He needs so much help, blah, blah, blah. I said, all right, here's what I want you to do. 1 to 2 page documents, this and this. And his first response was, well, I said, how about 2 weeks? 2 weeks for 2 to 4 pages. Like that should be ample time.
Absolutely.
I don't care what your clinical schedule
Absolutely.
is, especially if you've been thinking about this and you care about
And
this.
you want
right?
to do it, then
You want to do it.
Yeah.
His first reaction was, I've got a very busy clinical schedule coming up. It'll be more like a month. And I said, okay. Well, here's, I'm asking for 2 weeks.
Yes.
Because I think there are 2 things that have to happen in the next 4 weeks, and this would be the first thing. But
Yep.
you know what I'm asking.
Yeah.
Let's just
Yes.
go with God.
Yes.
Yeah. And amazingly, he did send me something. I haven't looked at it yet.
Oh, good.
But
Okay,
I'm like, okay, buddy. I mean, if you can't rally 2 pages in 2 weeks, I'm not sure this research game is for you.
Absolutely.
I mean, just saying.
Yeah. No, I totally agree with you. Yeah.
So it's very interesting. I'm not sure some early career people really appreciate how important these opportunities are,
Yes. Huge.
and how few people take advantage of them. It's such a missed opportunity.
Yep.
So anyway, that's like a little advertisement. Just do
Yes.
the thing.
I agree. I've done that. I do that every single time now. Is I ask for this, write down basically sort of what your sort of this idea you have. If you have a research question there, please put it down and explain to me why this is important and how this is going to help you in your career. And I want to see that.
I love your, now I haven't done how will this help you in your career. I really like that, because I don't want to just be I don't know, I mean, there's a role for people to help just get papers, papers. But I want this, I'm trying to build researchers. I want somebody who wants to have an externally funded research career so they can be, an independent scientist.
Yeah, I agree. And I look at the way I've thought of it, sort of like what you're saying, Anne, is that I want these people to, like, to your point, if I have a paper, like I would come to you, and if I was struggling with some paper, I'm like, man, for some reason I just can't. I would say, Anne, can we walk through this and you show me where am I missing this? I think there's a role for that, obviously, but I want people to go out. I want to take someone and make them have sustained success. I don't want them to be successful in this one area one time. I want them to have sustained success. And as part of that process, there's a lot of learning that goes along in that, and in helping people get better all the time to be at their best. And so I like that whole process of not just the one-time deals.
Yes. Now, that being said, it is true. You don't have to be an externally funded researcher to benefit from learning how to do research. There's a lot of scholarship involved too. And Chris and I are both excited about that and we're interested in that and supported. But my core mission is to grow researchers.
Yeah.
And that's my favorite thing to do.
Yeah.
Right. Speaking of that,
Yeah.
both of you,
Mhm.
did you, when you came into the research world, did you think that you were going to be writing grants? Did you know you'd go down this road?
That's a really good question.
You're saying you're looking for
Yeah,
people
that's
who
a-
know what's going on.
Yeah. And
That's a
Chris
great
went to
question.
medical school, so
Yeah,
that's
yes.
really not a thing.
No, yeah,
medical
exactly.
school, right?
That's a great question. I don't know that I thought of, when I first started, I really started because I was just naive and I had a question that I wanted to answer. I had a great mentor that heard me talk about this and said, oh, so you want to answer that question? How do you propose to answer that question? And I didn't know what in that world I was talking about. So I said, well, I think you could answer it by doing this, that, and the other. And slowly over time, they kind of showed me like, that's not the way to go. And then the world of grants sort of came, like he said, oh, well, you can answer this question by doing this project, that project, and know that you can get money to help you do these things. And so I sort of backed into it. Mm-hmm. I didn't know early on. Did you?
I knew that, well, I had done dissertation work that involved firms, businesses owned by physicians. And it was strictly econ. And, I was interested in health, but I didn't know anything about health. And then I thought, everybody talks to me like I know something about health. I do not. Maybe I should go see if it's interesting. Mm-hmm. Like, do I want to go deeper into this health thing, or is this just a one and done project? I'm going to move on. And so I knew there was a thing called a postdoc. I honestly can't remember how I learned that, but somehow I learned that. And I looked at postdocs and I thought, well, this is my shot. I'll spend 2 more years really learning about health and see if it's for me. Yeah. And after about 6 months, I got kind of sucked in. And I was really interested. It's very applied work. And that is the work. You get grants to do that work. And in that postdoc, I learned how to write grants. And my first couple grants got funded. And I was like, I'm great at this. Like, this sounds like a great career. And, then I had a number of failures. Then it got real. But, I had some early success and it encouraged me. And then I was like, I'm really digging this. You can do anything as long as you can get funding for it. I like that freedom. And so for me, it's so cool because you can totally change your world based on what projects you have funded. Yes. And so, like, I've been a professor in academics for my whole career, and I've had so many different jobs because my day job changed with those grants. And
Speaking of that, when people are coming to you asking you to play a role in whatever, have there been times when you've accepted too many at once and you're too strung out?
I did not plan this question.
That is.
What did you learn from
that? That's another spot on. No, that's a spot on question. There is a skill to not stretching yourself to then with exactly what you're saying, because you want to be able to feel like you're spending the time and investment on people. So there I have committed that sin definitely, where I've had too many people that I was trying to mentor and not doing a good enough job at any one of them. Mm-hmm. And so now I try to limit my world of in mentoring people, right, so that I feel like I can really give the time to everybody.
Yes, and that is a piece of choosing a mentor for a mentored research grant. For instance, you get Dr. Big, who has 20 mentees and is the director of this clinical service, and many reviewers will probably know that person or know of that person, and they'll say, come on, Dr. Big isn't going to spend the time with you that you say she is. Mm-hmm. Reject. So you have to be real. You, on the one hand, you want the stature of the Dr. Fabulous, but you also need somebody who can and will spend the time with you to actually help you. And so sometimes you'll see mentors, they write letters on your behalf to the grant agency, and they say, this is how many mentees I have right now. This is how many I can handle. I am committed to this person. Like, literally, you say the words. My boundaries are intact and it'll be okay.
Yeah.
It's not always true, but it's a piece of a reflection. So that's a piece of it for sure. And to Chris's point, it's one thing to not to say no as new things come up, like new opportunity. I really don't have the time. I have to say no. It's another thing to say no to something that's already on deck, because you have to make room with existing things. So there's a little strategy with clearing the decks. But generally speaking, to Chris's point, often I will say, I only have so much time to be a primary mentor for people. And then I have so much time to be a methods mentor to people. And then I could be a career mentor to more people. And it, kind of in my mind, informally, I know like how much time I have. And sometimes I just say, if there were two of me, I would really love to mentor you. I've had somebody say, will you be my mentor? And I say, no, it's simply not possible at this time. I only have so many slots, so to speak, and I'm simply booked.
Yeah.
And that's a sad thing. But what I do is I try to help them find somebody else. Or I might not have even been the right match, frankly, and they're just dredging the bottom. I was at the bottom of the barrel. Yes. I'm like, well, we can do better. Yes. Chris, you're bringing up early career people and maybe yourself. When you have a big idea and you're trying to hold on to your passion and yet chisel it down into something that like fits the scope, scale, budget, timeline. How do you do that? That's not too painful.
Yeah, I try. Yeah, so I've actually done a thing where, I have an idea now. So I'll tell you, I have an idea. This what I want to do now. So as an example, so poison patients are. There's a certain energy production that your body relies on. And when you get poison, that energy production changes because certain functions in your body do not work properly. So you have to, so that your cells can live, they have to change to the way that they create ATP. And one of the things I want to study is what that looks like in a poison patient. So up front, they want to use fatty acids because of the payoff is higher, the delta for the ATP they're making is higher. But as they get sicker, they use glucose and sugars because it's easier for them to use them to make ATP, but the ATP is not as great. And I want to study that in the poison patient. There's a methodology I think I can do that in. But to your point, I had to cut out some of that because the particular funding mechanism I'm going to apply for this particular grant for, that doesn't fit into what this particular project is. So, and it sort of irks me because I really want to study this. But what I've learned is though there's so many times these things come back around. So I will get my opportunity. This will come back around on my desk, where I will be able to apply for something else that specifically answers this other question that I have. And so nowadays I feel fine when I don't get to get everything I want from one research project, because I know that I will have an opportunity to come back and study this again.
So question, did you peel out a piece of it and still go after the grant you had in mind?
That's correct. I took a piece of it out that I really wanted to study and answer the question, but it doesn't work for this particular funding mechanism. And so I took it out and I have it sitting on my desk over here, hopefully not in my desk graveyard, but sitting over here, and I will come back to it.
Right. I always tell people they should have an idea book. Don't give anything away. Yeah, no ideas die. Right. But if, write it down in your book or put it in a document or whatever. Same thing with grants that don't get funded. There's a lot of good writing in there that you might be able to resurrect someday. To me, like the biggest win is when you had a grant, you resubmitted it, you went to the end of the algorithm. That, as it was, is dead for now. And then you can take all those pieces and write a nice manuscript and get it published. Yeah. That's a wonderful way to get something important out of that grant, even if you think for multiple reasons you're not going to revisit that line of inquiry.
Yeah, absolutely. Taking out what organization is looking for, applying it, and then keeping the other stuff in your back pocket.
Right. It's huge.
Right.
Yeah.
Yes.
All right. Well, Chris, Thank you so much. We learned
Thank
so
you.
much from you.
Thanks for having me.